European policymakers are navigating potential trade tensions with Donald Trump following his re-election. Welcome to Riks Europe, Philip Thompson, IP and trade policy analyst at Tholos Foundation.
Good morning, great to be here with you.
So could you tell us about, just to give the audience a bit more understanding about Trump's tariff proposals?
So on the campaign trail, Trump has proposed a variety of tariffs, a blanket tariff of 10 or 20%, and then additional tariffs on things from China up to 60%. He's also used tariffs applied to Mexico and other countries. But he's putting his cabinet together, and we'll see how that works out in the administration.
How realistic is the fear that the EU might overplay its hand by striking first in response to Trump's tariff threats?
There's a variety of scenarios where Europe and the United States could cooperate together on especially China. In Trump's first term, he offered to lower tariff to 0% with Europe, except for cars. He was interested in Europe cooperating with the United States and imposing tariffs on China. Europe wasn't going to do that, so we went alone. But now Europe is imposing tariffs on Chinese cars, so this could work out cooperatively, or it could be competitive.
What steps do you think the EU should take to maintain a strong negotiation position without escalating any trade tensions?
Europe should be the first one at the door at the White House and say, we're here with you, President Trump. We identify China as an unfair trade practitioner, and we have a package. These are things we can work with you on trade, especially with China. Instead of wait for tariffs and then wait to retaliate.
And some people say that Trump has a history of sort of aggressive tariff policies. How likely is it for him to water down his blanket approach in favor of sector-specific tariffs as speculated?
So the process for tariffs, Trump has to ask the Commerce Secretary, who's now been named, to investigate unfair trade practices. And then that Commerce Secretary has to propose solutions to those unfair trade practices when they find them to be real. And then finally, Trump has to say, we accept that those tariffs that are proposed by the Commerce Secretary. So in that process, the tariffs that are recommended, they could be what Trump asked for, 25% or 10%, or they could be less. In the past, in Trump's first administration, one tariff threat he had was on cars. And the Commerce Secretary made a report, and they said auto imports to the United States were a threat to national security and recommended 25% tariffs. But then Trump declined those. So Trump has shown as president that he's been able to weigh the pros and cons of tariffs. And we'll see what happens with these tariff recommendations from the Commerce Secretary. Tariff recommendations for a blanket tariff of all imports to the United States would surely be litigated. That hasn't been done before using these executive authorities. And he would have to show that all imports are a national security threat or unfair trade practice to the United States. And that's probably a really hard ask for the Commerce Secretary to prove that. So if we see huge tariffs right out of the gate, I'm sure they'll be litigated, and it won't be immediate. But there is a process through the Commerce Department that will maybe probably water those down or manage them, then he'll be able to impose straight away.
Should the EU see this as an opportunity to advance free trade? Or does it risk forcing concession that could weaken EU's regulatory standards?
So the United States and Europe, we have similar values on democracy, on free trade, on fair trade. There's been a good question has been asked, why isn't there a United States and European trade agreement? There was the TTIP negotiations during the Obama administration. But since then, the European Union has imposed lots of other regulatory barriers that hit specifically American companies through digital services taxes. And now the latest is AI Act. So there's different scenarios where the first phone call with the European Union and the United States is one of conflict, and they're arguing about why is Europe imposing these taxes or digital regulations that hurt only American companies. And it's easy to see how, if that's the first phone call between Europe and the United States, tariffs go ahead first, and there's less cooperation with Europe, the United States, and China. But there are shared values. Europe does recognize China, like the United States, as an exporter of products that hurt our markets, that are heavily subsidized. And since then, Europe, since the first Trump administration, Europe has enacted several trade regulations, like the foreign subsidies regulation, which is something the United States can look into to cooperate on how we address China together. But if that's not the first phone call, if the first phone call conversation is about the differences between Europe and the United States, and Europe going ahead to attack American companies, I think that's a lot less likely to happen. And we could see tariff war and retaliation like we saw in the first administration.
Thank you so much, Philip Thompson, IP and trade policy analyst at Tholos Foundation, that you could be here today.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Riks Europe.